Words of joy and hope. It is the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year C, Luke 14, 25, 33, and the commentary by Father Fernando Armelini. Great crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and addressed them. If anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. A good Sunday to all. Recall the evangelical text of last week. Jesus had been invited to eat by a Pharisee. Today, we found him traveling. He has followed his path because his goal is to go to Jerusalem. What happens now? After Jesus proposed to his disciples to choose the last position, to be servant of others, free of charge, now he had to marvel that after what he had already asked his disciples, there was still a large crowd that was following him. The evangelical text is not speaking from a chronicle of what happened 2,000 years ago. Luke is saying the same thing that happens today too. There are crowds around Jesus, but the question posed by today's gospel text is the following. Have they understood what is the meaning to follow him? It is a large crowd. Today we would be proud because the opposite happens to us. Precisely, you could point, previously you could point the finger to those who did not go to church. And today, we point the finger at those who go. We must ask ourselves, what is the real reason for all this? The temptation is to place all responsibility in the hedonism, secularism that has its weight. But we must ask ourselves, if those who move away from the Christian community have really understood the invitation that Jesus makes. Perhaps, if they have understood it, they have moved away because they were scared to always behave as servants of the brothers and sisters. This is not something that comes instinctively. Therefore, they found it very difficult to accept this invitation from Jesus, and they have preferred to return to the ways of this world. This is the option that we must respect. But perhaps there are other reasons as well. It may be that we have not presented with passion and clarity the invitation that Jesus does to those who want to be his disciple. Not that we care about the number, and Jesus cares when there are many. Not because there are many, but because perhaps they have not understood what he asks. And Jesus turned. He addresses all of us. He looks us in the face, in the eye, and he says, if someone comes to me, note that he does not say, if one comes after me. This assumes already that one is his disciples, but he says, comes to me, because they have felt some attraction. Jesus has aroused some sympathy for them. This is what we see also today. Jesus still enjoys great sympathy and esteem because he embodies the good person, and it is impossible to remain indifferent in front of him. But this sympathy is not yet the falling in love, what engages you for a lifetime. It is a first attraction, a first invitation. And we see also today how many people approach Jesus for some specific reason. And this is fine. Some seek Jesus, for example, for the cure of a disease, or a saint is resorted to get a grace. It's okay. Some are devotees of certain relics. This is not ideal, but it is a rapprochement to Jesus, a rapprochement to the parish. Maybe because there is something nice that interests us. It is a first approach, although it is very weak and not ideal. Jesus does not cast away or cast out anyone. Those who approach him, even if they do not have the most correct expectations, are welcomed. Nor did the disciples felt the attraction of following Jesus because they had understood that they had to donate their lives. Not at all. They thought that Jesus would be a successful person and that they too would be along with him. But Jesus is not content. He's not happy with people approaching him just for any reason. He wants to lead people to reflect, to understand well what kind of relationship he expects. It is a relationship of the lover, the one who wants to involve the whole person in a lifetime project in common. And in fact, he begins to specify what he wants. There are 3 requirements uttered with very strong expressions. People in love always seek to appear a little bit better than what they are, but Jesus is very clear. Then you must decide if you accept his proposal or not. He does not want momentary enthusiasm, ephemeral interest. This is what the prophet Hosea says to the people of Israel. Your love is like a small morning cloud that disappears with the first rays of the sun. It is a first enthusiasm for Jesus, but as soon as the difficulties arrive, they move away. Let us try to understand well, because there is a risk of interpreting the words of Jesus as a request for sacrifice, for resignation that have no justification. So in the past, at times, the gospel was presented as a set of prohibitions of everything that was good, pleasant, pleasurable. No, that was wrong. This made forget the objective, that it is the beatitude, joy, feast. It is becoming a full person. It is fullness of life. This is the goal. But there are demands to reach these goals. And the way Jesus presents them is very actual. We know the diffuse mentality of our society does not encourage strong, definitive, irreversible options, emotional options that require a long commitment. The comparison here is that of the falling in love. Today, emotional decisions are usually provisional until they last, while they are gratifying. And when a definite life project is suggested, the answer many times is, who needs to worry? Everything is provisional. This mentality is the exact opposite of what Jesus asks of the one who falls in love with him. You have to play your life according to his proposal. Therefore, better to be clear. Let us see the requirement. The first one. If someone comes to me, not if someone comes after me, but if someone feels a little sympathy for me, if anyone comes to me without hating his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. He mentions hating. Another translation is loving him more than the father, the mother, and everyone else. Both translations are okay, but it's still a kick in the stomach. And this is very important today, to wake up the conscience of the Christians in our communities. Some preachers today seek to avoid mentioning this because they are afraid that it will empty the churches. But the church is empty precisely because the presentation is not clarified. Or perhaps what Jesus asked for is not well understood. The phrase of Jesus is provocative, it is shocking, and it is a way to get attention. And therefore the reaction is, but what on earth is he saying? Jesus begins with a phrase that is scandalous. If love for me is not superior to the love you have for your father, your mother, family, and everything else, and your own life, you cannot be my disciple. So the original text, it does not say love more or less. It's like our translation did above. It's much harder and reflects the Semitic language. It talks about hate, misein, the one who doesn't hate his father and mother, as we have heard. Let us understand well the meaning of this expression that is typical of the Semitic world. Thus, in chapter 21 of the book of Deuteronomy, there is talk of one who has two women. The first woman of whom he had a first child, but then he has preferred and married another that becomes the beloved. The other is called the hated one. This is the literal translation, but she was not hated, but was less loved than the preferred one. And in the book of Deuteronomy, also in the same place, it's established that the firstborn born of the hated woman is entitled to the inheritance of the firstborn, although his mother is no longer the loved one. Deuteronomy 21, 15, 17. It is therefore a Semitic expression to indicate that another wife has entered, allowed at the time by polygamy, and the other was less loved. That is, in the first place, there is now another person. Let us understand well. It is not about denying the most beautiful affections and the most sacred bonds that God has wanted in our life. It is like when a young man falls in love with his beloved and decides to marry her, leaves the father and mother. Not that he loves them less or that his love for them decreases. His love for parents doesn't diminish. He doesn't forget them. He doesn't reject them. He places with them a new relationship because now his wife is in the first place. And so decisions are made taking into account the views of parents, but the options are made based on the agreement with the wife of what the wife thinks. Today, we hear parents speak that they may not agree with the options of the son and daughter-in-law, and say, we don't like what they have decided to do. But the important thing is that the two of them agree. This is very beautiful because they have understood that this love is not in contradiction with theirs, but they must keep distance. This is what Jesus says. When you decide to be with me, everything else has a new perspective. You must have a different view. Option must be made in tune with Jesus' thinking. And it is difficult for us to realize how, in the time of Jesus, how strong it was, the condition in the relationship with the family. The family was called by the house, or casa, because the house gives a sense of protection, of security. And in the time of Jesus and immediately afterwards, the one who entered in the Christian community risked being repudiated by his family. This involved support and protection, and the right to inheritance was also lost. This is what it means to follow Jesus. It means that choosing him, he risked losing everything. This relationship with father, mother, family has for us the meaning of the link with tradition. Perhaps your religious practice is based on tradition in a catechesis that has no longer applies today. It had its time. It was made of devotions and even much ignorance. If today you get in touch with the Word of God, with the Gospel, which is Christ, you must make a choice. Give up all those convictions that gave you security, because now you have discovered the joy of the Gospel. Jesus comes to alter human traditions that do not correspond to God's design. This then is the first demand. All beautiful and sacred affections enter a new dimension. When Christ is found, He is the point of reference for all the options. And Jesus sets an example of family detachment. At 34, He left His mother, He left Nazareth, His relatives and friends. They tried to bring Him back home to lock Him in the tradition of His family from Nazareth. But Jesus wants that the one who follows Him enlarge his heart to a new family, which includes even the enemies, even those who have done you harm. Because all those who need the gifts of God that God has placed in your hands, you must serve them. It is then the overcoming of all enclosures, even hating your own life. It means that you must no longer think of yourself. Not only must not think about family and the rest, let's understand it well, it is in the sense of putting them as a point of reference. The Christian has opened the heart to a family that is that of the world, that of humanity. You can no longer put what you like as a reference point. Your options must be made in tune with Christ. Let us listen to the second condition. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. The second requirement, to carry your own cross. Without this, one cannot be my disciple, says Jesus. What does carry your cross mean? It does not mean patiently enduring setbacks, the small or great sufferings of life. It was not necessary for Jesus to come to tell us we need to endure some things. This is about making a choice to assume the consequences of the option that accompanies following Jesus. This goes against the criteria of the world. It means being willing to do everything to be faithful to the gospel. And this implies accepting suffering, also persecution, marginalization, and even sometimes death, to remain faithful to Christ, to be faithful to the truth, to the proposal of life made by Jesus. It can mean giving up success that one could have accomplished, compromising the conscience, also by sense of omission, not to say, not to do, not to criticize. It means being willing to make heroic choices if the gospel so requested. Think, for example, when a couple is faced with a problematic pregnancy. Carrying the cross means making the option to forgive, of loving the enemy even when this makes us appear as weak, one who is incapable to assert himself, to take revenge. Carrying the cross also means accepting society's contempt, because society can consider the Christian as a failure, a loser. It means accepting being ridiculed. When Jesus went to Jairus' house, who called him because his daughter had died, when Jesus arrives at Jairus' house, he hears all the noise and the cries, and Jesus says, "The girl is not dead, she's asleep." And they made fun of him. This also happens to Christians today who have believed in Christ, who has spoken of the life of the eternal that has been given to us. And death for a Christian is a dream for an awakening to a new life. It is a comparison that we use. And some ridicule it. If the Christian really follows Christ and he trusts Him, he must keep in mind that he can be ridiculed. The cross is all this. But be attentive, careful. It is not suffering for the sake of suffering, but what inevitably accompanies the one who wants to be faithful to Christ. And Jesus wants this to be clear. And now comes the third request that Jesus introduces with two parables. Which of you, wishing to construct a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there is enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers would laugh at him and say, "This one began to build but did not have the resources to finish." Or, what king marching into battle would not first sit down and decide whether with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose another king advancing upon him with 20,000 troops? But if not, while he is still far away, he will send a delegation to ask for peace terms. In the same way, any one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. We said that faith in Jesus is a falling in love. It is to risk life together with him. And Jesus tells two short parables because he wants that if someone decides to follow him, he should check well his strength. And the same happens in marriage. You run the risk of taking things lightly and not calculating the choice made, and just follow the emotions, the enthusiasm, the passions that are momentary, and then disappointments inevitably come. Jesus wants us to have our eyes wide open. What does the option of following Jesus entail? And to make himself well understood, Jesus uses two parables. The first is about the construction of a tower. In the Palestinian fields, there were many guard towers to protect the fruits of the field from thieves. Jesus does not refer to these towers that did not require a great expense. The tower is a construction that looks to the sky. And to build a tower meant to be seen, to be noticed, to rise, to be a person worthy of admiration. In the background, you can see the reconstruction of the most famous towers built by Herod in its palace in Jerusalem, in the western part of the city, the highest part. There were these three great towers. One of them is Mariamne's, dedicated to her favorite woman. Then in the middle, the Phasael tower for his brother, which was the most beautiful of the three towers, only 45 meters high, but at that time it was considered one of the wonders of the world, as beautiful as the lighthouse of Alexandria, which was 112 meters, but its beauty was equivalent. Then the third tower, that of Hippicus, that Herod had built to increase his own glory. Then he also thought about building one for his own grave. When he passed through the Greece, he saw the Parnassus, the mausoleum that Artemis, Parnassus' wife, had built for her husband. It was one of the wonders of the world, and Herod wanted to imitate that. You can see the reconstruction in the background. It was 25 meters high. It is called the Herodion. Near Bethlehem, it was made with white marble to be seen from the Mount of Olives. the Herodian could be contemplated from Jerusalem. And he wanted that after the death, he would be appreciated for his greatness. We ask ourselves, what is left of these towers? Everything has disappeared. Jesus uses the comparison of the tower as a construction of something that rises to heaven. A life that rises to heaven. We all want to leave a memory of our passage through this world, a tower that everyone can admire, a life that has left a sign in the world. And Jesus, as a good architect, proposes his project, his tower project. We already heard two conditions for those who want to build his tower. He's really a reliable architect. A tower that will withstand time and will not collapse. Jesus says it is an investment that involves many sacrifices. Do not think that it is an easy thing, because it can happen that it should be abandoned in the middle of the construction because there is no more money. Jesus still has not said how much the tower will cost. If you build your tower paying what it costs, then your tower will remain. Jesus says, if you are going to build a tower, sit down, think about it. If you don't feel the need to sit down and reflect, it means that you have not understood the project of this tower. Soon, when I tell you how much it will cost you to build this tower, you better be seated, because I could make you dizzy when you hear about the price, like when you receive certain bills. Better to be seated. So this is the first parable. The second, a king who goes to war, but first he must sit. Hear the importance of sitting down to reflect, because if you do not, it means that you have not understood what the price of the tower is, or the price that war will cost you. You have to take into account a great fight, but not against external enemies, but against that compulsion that leads you to think about yourself, to fall back on your own interests. It will be a very demanding war. Sit down, because you must evaluate if you have the necessary strength to maintain this war. Jesus does not want to discourage anyone, but to make it clear what the challenges are. And he now mentions the price. If you want to spend little, then be content to admire the other towers, those towers built by those who trusted Jesus and are towers that remain. All these words of Jesus are to make us understand the third condition that probably darken all enthusiasm. This is the price. Who of you does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. So this is the price of the tower. Everything you have. There are paper castles that are the successes of this world, headlines in the newspapers, the news on television, this greatness that everyone wants, to which everyone aspires. They are small towers on which we want to see ourselves, but they are fragile, inconsistent. There is nothing left of them. If we want to build the tower according to Jesus' project, we have to risk everything. This is the price of the tower. Then the war. War is against the idol, that is, the goods of this world. We have this attachment, and therefore this leads you to not give them for free to the one in need. and you don't build the tower that remains. Think it over. The option of following Christ implies a completely new behavior, also in relation to money. Jesus wants his followers to be free from all attachments. Only those who are fully free can follow him. And all this is to be happy. It is not about giving up something waiting for another life, but to appropriate yourself already in this world of what makes you truly happy. The greatest infidelity to God and others is to give up being happy. Jesus tells you that if you want to be happy, invest your life in the construction of a tower that can be truly admired by God and by all. This tower costs a lot, the donation of all the goods that God has placed in your hands, and that they should be shared with those who need them. I wish you all a good Sunday and a good week.